There's a particular smell that old cars had, something between warm vinyl, cigarette smoke, and the faint hint of motor oil coming through the vents. You'd slide across a wide front seat to get to the window, reach up and crack open that little triangular glass to let the air in, and someone in the back would be fiddling with the radio. Everything about the way a car worked back then was different, not worse, just different, in ways that made sense at the time, until one day they didn't anymore. America didn't lose these features all at once. It lost them one model year at a time. Here are 10 of them, and the story behind why each one disappeared. Here's what we're going to find out today. What was the one feature that luxury car owners were so proud of, it ended up getting stolen right off the hood? Why did someone think putting a record player inside a moving car was a good idea? And what actually happened when they tried? What did every American family car have in the front seat that you simply cannot find anymore? And what feature disappeared, not because nobody liked it, but because the government said it had to go? Let's start up front. Before bucket seats, before center consoles, before the idea that every passenger needed their own individual space, there was the bench seat. One long, continuous seat stretching all the way across the front of the car, wide enough for 3 people, covered in cloth or vinyl, with nothing in between. You could slide all the way from the passenger door to right beside the driver without lifting yourself out of the seat. On a long road trip, that mattered. A mother could reach across and hand something to a child. A couple could sit close without awkward armrests between them. The middle spot wasn't always comfortable. You straddled the hump of the drive shaft, and there was no headrest. But it existed, and people used it. Here's something almost nobody thinks about anymore. Bench seats made the front of a car feel like a room, like a small living space that happened to be moving down a highway. When bucket seats came in, and the center console went up between driver and passenger, something closed off. The car became 2 separate spaces, sharing the same windshield. Bench seats are still out there, mostly in trucks and a handful of full-size sedans, but in the ordinary family car, they're gone. The seat that held 3 generations of Sunday drives isn't coming back. Look at the corner of a car door in any photograph from the 1950s or early 60s. Right where the side window meets the windshield, there's a small triangular piece of glass, set in its own frame, hinged at the front so it can pivot open. That's a vent window, and it did something that sounds almost too simple to matter. It let you aim a stream of moving air directly at your face, without opening the whole window and letting the wind tear through the car. Before air conditioning was standard in American vehicles, and for most of the 1950s it wasn't, not even close. That little triangle of glass was how you stayed cool on a hot afternoon. Pivot it open just right, and the airflow would curl straight into the cabin, hitting the driver's face without buffeting the whole interior. Truckers loved them. Long-haul drivers swore by them. When air conditioning became standard through the late 1960s and 70s, the vent window lost its job. Car designers took it out because it complicated the door line and hurt aerodynamics. There was a time when the ashtray in a car wasn't optional equipment. It was standard, built right into the dashboard, sometimes into the rear armrest too, alongside a small metal lighter that glowed orange when you pushed it in and waited a few seconds. In 1965, roughly half of all American adults smoked. The car was where they did a good portion of it. The ashtray wasn't an afterthought. It was as standard as the speedometer. Here's what almost nobody remembers. When smoking started to fade and automakers quietly dropped the built-in ashtray, they didn't remove the lighter socket. They just stopped calling it a lighter socket. Today, it's a power outlet, the port you plug your phone charger into, the one that runs a dash cam or a GPS unit. The cigarette lighter became a USB port without anyone making a formal announcement. The socket stayed, the smoke left, and a generation of drivers uses that outlet every single day without knowing what it used to be for. In the mid-1950s, Chrysler had an idea, a genuinely extraordinary idea, in the way that only ideas from that particular era of American optimism could be extraordinary. Put a record player in the car, not a radio. An actual record player, needle, vinyl, spinning platter, mounted under the dashboard, playing 45 revolutions per minute records while the car moved down the road. They called it the Highway Hi-Fi, and they offered it as an option on several models starting in 1956. Here's what almost nobody knows. It actually worked, up to a point. The engineers designed a special tone arm that could handle the vibration of normal road surfaces, and the records played reasonably well on smooth pavement. The problem was that American roads in the 1950s were not always smooth. Hit a pothole, and the needle skipped. Hit a railroad crossing, and the record scratched. By the time cassette tapes arrived in the mid-1960s, the in-car record player was already gone, not because the idea was wrong, but because the roads weren't ready for it. Or maybe the roads were never going to be ready for it. Either way, it remains one of the most wonderfully impractical ideas the American auto industry ever actually put into production. Look at the rear quarter panel of a luxury American car from the 1970s. A Cadillac DeVille, a Lincoln Continental, a Chrysler New Yorker. Running along the back of the roof, above the rear side windows, there are two curved pieces of chrome that look like decorative brackets. They serve no mechanical purpose whatsoever. They don't hold anything. They don't fold anything. They're called Landau bars, and they exist purely to suggest that the roof above them is made of soft fabric that folds back, like the top of an old horse-drawn carriage called a landau, even when it isn't. Even when the roof is solid steel, and always has been. It sounds like a strange thing to put on a car, but in the 1970s, the vinyl-topped sedan with landau bars on the rear quarter was what a successful American looked like when he drove to church on Sunday morning. It was status, spelled out in chrome. By the 1980s, tastes had shifted, and the ornate look that landau bars represented started to feel heavy and dated. They faded out quietly, one model year at a time. Today, they show up mainly at classic car shows, on Cadillacs that are loved and preserved by people who remember exactly what they meant. Before the floor shifter, before the center console, there was a gear lever mounted directly on the steering column, right there within reach of the driver's right hand, without requiring any reach downward at all. Americans called it 3 on the tree, because a 3-speed manual transmission mounted on the steering column was the standard setup in millions of cars from the 1930s all the way through the 1970s. Here's something worth knowing. For its time, it was genuinely clever. Keeping the shifter on the column meant the entire floor of the car could be flat, which meant a bench seat could stretch all the way across without anything in the way. The column shifter and the bench seat went together. When the floor shifter came in and the center console went up, it changed the whole interior layout of the American car in one move. Drivers today, who learned on a column shifter, and there are still plenty of them, will tell you it felt perfectly natural once you knew it. The reach up to the column, the click into second, the smooth pull down into third. Natural enough that millions of people drove that way for 40 years without ever thinking it was strange. Through the 1970s and into the 80s, a certain kind of car wore a luggage rack on its trunk lid, the way a well-dressed man wore a tie, as a signal of a particular kind of taste. These external racks were bolted to the trunk, trimmed in chrome or wood-grain vinyl, and designed to carry bags strapped down with bungee cords. They looked purposeful, even when they were empty. They looked like the car belonged to someone who went places. The practical reality was more complicated. Bags left on an external rack were exposed to rain and road debris. They weren't especially secure against theft, and as trunk space improved and interior storage got larger, there was less and less reason to strap anything to the outside of the car at all. The rack stayed popular as a styling detail long after it stopped being genuinely useful, which is true of a lot of things from that era of American automotive design. By the 1990s, it was gone from most production cars, surviving mainly as an aftermarket accessory for people who liked the look. In 1984, if you wanted to make a phone call from inside a moving car, you needed either a very large bag, a very expensive installation, or a Motorola Dynatac mounted in a cradle bolted to the center console. Car phones were real telephones, connected to the cellular network through an antenna on the trunk, powered by the car's own electrical system, with a handset on a curly cord that you picked up exactly like the phone in your kitchen. A car phone in 1985 cost several $1,000s to install and several dollars a minute to use. It was not for everyone. It was very specifically for someone who needed the world to know they could afford it. Here's the thing about the car phone that nobody really talks about. It was genuinely useful. A contractor who could take calls between job sites, a doctor on call who needed to be reachable, a real estate agent who worked out of her car. For those people, the car phone wasn't a luxury. It was the difference between being in business and missing the call that mattered. When cell phones became affordable enough for ordinary people to carry in a pocket, the installed car phone lost its only real advantage, which was that it was already there. For most of the 20th century, the hood of a luxury automobile was not complete without something sitting at the very front of it, a small sculpted figure, rising above the grille, facing forward into the wind. Hood ornaments began as purely decorative mascots, and then became something more: the Spirit of Ecstasy on a Rolls-Royce, the Leaping Jaguar on a Jaguar, the Star on a Mercedes, the Ram's Head on a Dodge, each one a small piece of metal that said something about what the car was and who built it. Here's what brought them down: pedestrian safety regulations. A rigid ornament projecting from the front of a vehicle at hood height poses a specific risk in a collision with a person on foot. European safety standards began requiring either the elimination of fixed hood ornaments or the use of retractable designs that collapse on impact. Most automakers chose elimination. Some, Rolls-Royce notably, engineered a retractable system so the Spirit of Ecstasy could survive. But on the ordinary production car, the hood ornament is gone. What's left is a logo pressed flat into the grille, flush with the surface, posing no risk to anyone. And finally, one of the most purely beautiful things the American auto industry ever put on a sports car: pop-up headlights, retractable headlights, the lights that slept flush with the hood when the car was parked in daylight and rose slowly, or snapped up, depending on the car, when you switched them on at dusk. The Mazda Miata had them, the Toyota Supra had them, the Ferrari Testarossa had them. So did the Pontiac Firebird, the Lamborghini Countach, and dozens of other cars that defined what a sports car was supposed to look like from the 1960s through the 1990s. Here's why they're gone, and it isn't a glamorous reason. Pedestrian safety regulations again, combined with the fact that pop-up headlights took a fraction of a second longer to illuminate than fixed lights, long enough to matter in a situation where reaction time is everything. Aerodynamics played a role too, and the mechanical complexity of the system meant one more thing that could break. Reliable beat beautiful, the way it usually does in the end. The last production car sold in the United States with pop-up headlights rolled off the line in the early 2000s. What replaced them works better by every measurable standard, but it doesn't look like anything. And the cars that had those rising lights looked like something you'd remember for the rest of your life. Here's the bigger thing underneath all of it. Every feature on this list made sense at the moment it was built. The bench seat made sense when families were large and roads were long and nobody had thought of a cup holder yet. The vent window made sense when air conditioning cost extra. The car phone made sense before the phone in your pocket existed. Each one solved a real problem for real people. And then the problem changed, or the solution got better, or the world moved on in a direction nobody quite predicted. That's how it always goes. The things we use every day feel permanent right up until the moment they don't. Next time you're in an older car At a show, in a grandparent's garage, or just passing one on the street. Look at it a little longer than you normally would. There's more history in that dashboard than most museums will ever have. Memory Lane, America. One story at a time.